the morning sunrise. In Lion's Gate 'neath the tall fir trees, on your face feel the ocean breeze. Feel the magic that's in the air, in Lion's Gate the fair.
Welcome to our second installment of August Backyard Bardic with the Lion's Den. I am Baron Kinerick, and tonight we will welcome two Bardic Titans of the Barony, Mistress Cushag and Master Nikolai of the Barony of Lion's Gate. Tonight is dedicated to period music and introducing some key instruments which help set the tone in any mead hall. For there is no Valhalla without songs. For there is no plague cart without a bell, as there would be no barony of Lionsgate without our bards. Mistress Cushag first became the branch arts officer through the hands of Master Gerhard and Amanda Kendall of Westmoreland in 1981, becoming the Baroness's inspiration in the arts the same year, as well as 1986. She received her Jean de Lion for excellence in the arts in Antir in 1982, and her Laurel in 1999. She has been instrumental to the barony since the beginning of Antir. She translated the McBean chant into a couple other languages, including Latin and French. She heralded myself personally into court with song for both of my peerage elevations, using the beautiful sounding translation of this chant. If any of you know it, you'll understand why this caused some chuckles. Master Nikolai first received his Award of Arms in 1976 from the West, before the creation of Antir. He became the Baroness's Inspiration in Arts in 1978 and Baroness's Inspiration in Science in 1984. His Jean de Lion under their Majesties of Antir, Torgal and Aaron in 1985, and Laurel in 1990. Both these local legends have deep roots in period music, and we are so excited they found time to speak with us today. Please help welcome two of my favorite people in this game of ours, Mistress Cushag and Master Nikolai.
Well, thank you, Your Excellency, for your kind words. Yeah, Nikolai predates me by a little bit.
Yeah.
I think he's only about a year or so in after the founding of the barony, so
1 year.
we're a couple of dinosaurs here. Before we start, I would like to raise my hands in respect to recognize and acknowledge the Katsi, Kwantlen, Stolo, and Halkomanum First Nations, as well as all Coast Salish peoples on whose traditional and unceded territories we live, we learn, we play, and we do our work. So I'm going to share screen. We have a PowerPoint presentation that will be interspersing with our screens of things, and you should be able to see us in the screen at the side. We also have, as you can see in the background, there's my table, and Master Nikolai has his table behind him.
Behind your chair.
Behind my chair, yes. Turn my chair a little bit, and you might be able to see them all.
No,
Other way. There we go. We did a quick count before we started, and Nikolai says we have about 40 different instruments
Over
here.
40.
Here with us, as well as the many we have on our slideshow. We do have a little bit of a few clips to share with you, so you can spot the instruments that we've been talking about and hear them in use by professionals, and then open the field to questions at the end. And we are available for as long as you will want us, at least until they kick us off. So without further ado, I will share my screen. And we'll start. So we've got a bit of an introduction. We'll then go through all these different instruments. And yes, we do count voice as an instrument. our audio clips, some things about working in an instrumental consort, and then open it up for questions. So we are trying to, in order to keep this within a reasonable amount of time, we are limiting the scope of our discussion. And we're looking at European instruments from about 1100 to about 1600. It sort of aligns with the period, the period of, that was notated music in European area. But we're also looking at we're not looking at the instruments from the people who didn't use notation. So those with the oral traditions, best to talk to those experts, people like Brianna Cassia or Mistress Gala, or some of those other people who work in the people in the areas that had an oral tradition rather than a notated tradition. And that does limit us to most of the mainland Europe, not the north necessarily, and a little bit of the Middle East. Instruments sort of change, how they were used changed over time. Voice, of course, is the original instrument, although some stick using people might disagree with that, you know, as in percussionists. But I think that mothers were singing their infants to sleep before men were hitting logs or stones with sticks. My opinion, but they then started using instruments in conjunction or in concert with the voice, and then started doubling or replacing voices with instruments. Moving on to music that was written for both to be used together as opposed to one or the other. And then in later period, you get music that's written for instruments only, voice only, or a combination. And the use of the instruments affected and was also affected by the changing styles in music. So even in the, 500 years that we're looking at here, musical styles changed dramatically. We're not really going to address that, but just to acknowledge that there are slight differences in the early period and the late period. So just thinking of some conventions, these are sort of things that the musicians in the Middle Ages would have accepted as normal. They divided instruments into two types, and they're based on volume. So you've got your high instruments and your low instruments, and nowadays we think of high and low as pitch. They think of it as loud and soft. So the high or the loud instruments were mostly for outdoor use, and there are things like the shawm, any of the brass instruments, bagpipes, the cornetto, or also called the zinc, the hurdy-gurdy, the crumhorns. Those are all high instruments. The lower soft instruments, again for indoor use, recorders, lute, psaltery, any of the plucked strings. The portative organ or organetto is also a low instrument. Percussion could be either high or low, depending on what it was and how it was played. And there were also a few other instruments, such as the rebec or the crumhorns, that could go both ways, depending on who they were playing with. And a lot of the time, a musical group would be composed of multiple instruments of different types, but they would be of the same volume group. So you'd have high instruments, and there might be, a shawm, a cornetto, and some crumhorns, and you might have another group that was a recorder, a psaltery, a plucked string instrument of some sort, and a harp, and that would be considered a perfectly good ensemble. The Renaissance, when they got to it, referred back to them as a mixed or broken consort. To them, of course, every succeeding music period thinks the one before it is inferior, antiquated, wrong.
Yes.
So to them, mixing instruments was wrong. The Renaissance like nice uniform ones, and music was mainly written in as melody lines, a single melody line like a dance tune, or for vocal music they might do a melodic line that was written over a tenor line that was based on chant. But it was or small groupings of 2 or 3 lines that again were written over an underlying sort of bass line, what we think of as bass line today. And that's sort of how the medieval mind worked with music, at least in the early part. The Renaissance, with of course the rebirth, the hearkening back to the classical ways of Greece and Rome, or inventing new ones for themselves, was more like it in music. They liked the uniform groupings of voice or instruments. So they would have families or consorts of instruments that would cover the entire range of pitches. Each instrument had a limited range, but when you layer them together, you can cover everything. So we have our consorts of recorders, we have our consorts of cornemuse, have crumhorns, they have consorts of viols.
Just about everything.
Just about everything, yeah. Brass consorts were a little different. They tended not to have different sized instruments of the same kind. Trumpets themselves were mostly used for fanfares. They were a status symbol, used by towns and or the ruling class for ceremonial purposes. So in dance music, their place is often taken by the cornetti or the zincs. Sackbuts, or
the bass lines.
Bass lines, yeah. So they would use a broken consort there to cover the same ranges. They still split them into high and low, and the plucked strings and the keyboards move to a solo or an accompaniment thing. So things like virginals or the lute became something that noble people played to show that they had the time to learn to do it, but it was also considered one of those things that learning to play an instrument and entertaining one's family or one's royalty after dinner was a good thing. But also too, music was an after dinner activity that noble people were expected to know how to do, to sing, to play at least one instrument, to participate in after dinner music. And the music of this period, because of this sort of change in outlook, is constructed to be used in these musical families. So you get things like madrigals that are constructed to work in a certain way using multiple voices. It doesn't really work to sing just one line of a madrigal. You need all the other parts. So, and this is the sort of music they call polyphonic, as opposed to the monophonic or a single line medieval music. That sort of gives you a little bit of background on the music that these instruments are playing. So having got that out of the way, let's move on to the fun stuff. I will be putting this out for people to look at later and download. So I will send it to the chat at the end of the session, and people can download it if they wish. Timothy McGee, one of our excellent resource texts, tells us that many of the writers through the 15th through 17th centuries actually wrote about the use of the voice. And either a lot of them agreed on how to do it, or they didn't disagree. But just for your fun, I've enclosed here some advice that was the same from multiple writers. Because we have no recordings, we don't know what the vocal conventions were, only from these sources. Sing with the mouth open only as wide as in conversation. Do not open your mouth wide or close your teeth. Place the singing tone in the front of the mouth and avoid singing from the back of the mouth, the back of the throat, or through your nose. Use a moderate tone. Don't force the voice. That's a forced voice. Yeah. Sing with a steady tone that does not change in pitch, volume, or intensity. Now, some people apparently did that to try and show vocal expression, but they don't actually advocate colorless. They just don't say don't use tremolo or vary pitch that doesn't stay on pitch to for vocal expression. Silvestro Ganassi, and Nikolai does have Ganassi, if anybody's interested in things. He was writing for instrumentalists, especially recorder players, on how to ornament. But he was in 1535, and he was urging instrumentalists to imitate the singer's use of flexible volume for expression. And if anybody's interested in seeing the sorts of exercises that they were showing, they basically have the one line here, and then they do it in varying intensities of, and this is how you can ornament it, the same line this way, and then more so, and then more so, and more so. And it's basically, it's how to be a
virtuoso.
Yeah. So rapid notes should receive clear articulation. Passages with text should receive clear articulation with the tongue, and untexted passages should be articulated clearly in the throat. And for example, when in the High Middle Ages, they would often give you a bunch of notes, what they call a melisma, with no text. And there's a Dufay piece that I learned with at college that actually starts with one of these. And then they start the words. But one of the other writers, Herman Fink, warned against sounding like a goat. Yeah. And they also said, avoid excessive body motion while singing. So there we have it. These are all Renaissance writers, but it is felt, McGee feels that this also applied to some of the late medieval and even earlier medieval singers as well, that they were just sort of carrying on. Percussion. The bells. Nikolai does have bells. We couldn't get them in the form, the hanging bells like you see in the pictures here, but he found his at Toys R Us.
There we go.
And give us a little dingle. Just a nice little addition in. One of the instruments you often see is the 3-hole pipe with the tabor at the same time. The tabor is a small drum. Nikolai has a large tabor. You can.
Hasn't been seen for a while.
I will admit that the 3-hole pipe was one of my magical moments. I'll talk about that later. Nakers.
Let's see.
The nakers are one of the instruments that we imported from the Middle East. Nakri, I believe, was
Nakari.
the nakat, or I've seen it. I'll spell Nakri as well,
Yeah.
depending on how far back you go.
Yeah.
These are one of the 5 major instruments that we stole from the Saracens
Mm-hmm.
and brought back to Europe.
Drums, lutes.
Yeah, things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you've ever, Nikolai actually once drummed Amanda onto the warfield at Clinton with these, which was sort of fun. But if you take a look at them, if you hold them up, Nikolai, to the bottom, you'll see that they do have a certain familiarity about them, except that they're very little. When they grew up and became modern, we now call them timpani. These ones are meant to be played on horseback, so that's why they're so small. Give us a little drumming.
Tension on.
Yeah. Oh, nice little thing. We also use a lot of the you do see the dumbeks that are Middle Eastern being used. Not sure exactly how old they are, but they certainly do give us a good medieval flavor. Cymbals. These are the zills or finger cymbals. They also had larger cymbals. Tambourines. Castanets were also used. We don't have any of those. I've not ever been able. I was a percussionist in my earlier years. I used the little ones that they had tensioned, and you played them on the board. I could never able to work the real ones, which take some skill. And the one other thing that we do have, Nikolai, is the bell string. Other kind of bells are the little jingle bells. We have them on a strap like this. Again, gives a nice little accompaniment to
Or
your.
sometimes dancers would wear them on their ankles too.
That's true. Especially Morris dancers would do that. So, and basically anything that you could hit can be used for percussion. It just adding in a little bit of extra things. I've seen somebody use closed seashells and putting them together as.
Well, I didn't bring the coconuts.
Yes, and of course there are the ever-present coconuts, a la Monty Python.
Yes.
Nikolai does have some, and yeah, yes, they have been used.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on
Mistress
to our
Cushag.
flutes, and we're using this to include all of the woodwinds that don't have reeds.
Okay, Mistress Cushag, if
So
I
again-
may for a second, really quickly, I think with the volume of instruments, it might be necessary to play them fairly quietly because I believe Zoom clips the audio after it reaches a certain volume level.
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure that some of the sounds of the instruments were retained through the recording.
Okay, we're still with the fairly quiet ones, so
All right, we'll see how it goes.
have we been cut out yet?
On a couple of instruments, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do I have to play the loud ones out in the hall?
We may have to. Okay. Double pipes. Now, let's see if I can remember. One of my colleagues at college had his parlor trick, and if I got it right. You can blow two recorders at the same time. Doesn't work very well. I used to be able to play chopsticks.
These ones have got smaller beaks, so maybe it would.
The other you can see them actually, the double pipes where they've got the two of them. You're blowing them both at once, and you're fingering basically one pipe with each hand. The 6-hole pipes are the forerunners of today's penny whistle. And no thumb hole on these. There's just 6 holes in the front. And in order to change your octave, you have to overblow.
Blow harder.
So I had to put all my fingers back down and blow harder. That was all just breath control. The Renaissance transverse flute, I'd hope to have one with me tonight, but I believe that Millicent has one, and that I know that Brynja has one that she plays. Nikolai has a fife here. Ah, there we go. Can you unmute?
Yeah, this is an alto flute. Yeah, the body of it is the same as the recorder, but it's a transverse flute, like a modern transverse flute. Let's see.
So rather than have it blowing into the top and having the fipple split the stream of air that causes the sound, you actually have to split your airstream in the mouthpiece using an embouchure.
Yeah, I'm out of practice, but
Yeah, and it takes a lot more skill than it looks like. Gem's horns. Gem's horns are fun. Gem's horns are actually made out of horn. Ours are resin, of course, and they have a very limited range because the pitch is determined by the volume of the horn. And essentially what they've done is as you can see in the top of the Gem's horn there, they put in a wooden plug and plugged it and sealed it with beeswax. And then everything else is below that. Your wind, you basically blow in. You can see I hope you can see my little thing there. That is the fipple where the airstream is split. Part of it comes out and the rest of it goes down into the horn. And the finger holes give you your pitches. And I can give us a little. Yeah. Can't actually play green sleeves on that. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Not enough range. The 3-hole pipe and tabor is, I love Gem's horns. They're a lovely mellow sound. And Nikolai has made some out of cow's horns.
Mm-hmm.
He used to do workshops in that. So there were people who had real cow's horn Gem's horns 20, 30 years ago.
Or longer than that.
Or longer than that.
Oh, yeah. Don't breathe in while you're making it. Nuh-uh. Cow's horn tastes like crap.
The 3-hole pipe, that was one of my magic moments, was watching Baron Viscount Sir Theodulf of Boregrove wandering around the tourney field with his small daughter held by one hand and playing music with a 3-hole pipe on the other. That was like one of those absolute magical moments for me. Like that, yes, now I feel like this is the sort of thing that a musician might have done with, got to watch the kid too. Panpipes, again, were very much in use. Earlier period, they started to go out of use. McGee gives us actually a lovely chart. I don't know if you can see it too well, but it tells you how the instruments, when they were popular and when they rose and when they fell and how they did. I've got a copy of this. Nikolai has a copy of this, I believe.
Celeste has a copy.
Celeste has a copy. It is a really good book, and if you're wanting to do any early music, it's basically a performer's guide on how to do period practice.
And it's still in print through U of T.
Yeah. And of course, recorders. Recorders is where Nikolai and I started. I played recorder before I joined the society in 1979.
I did too.
And so did
Back in
Nikolai.
the early 70s.
Yeah. We do have here in the middle is a picture of the oldest surviving recorder. It was found in a basement in Dordrecht, you said?
Yes. They found it in the basement of a house that got bombed out in Holland in 1940.
And they dated it to 1390. And then right next to it is a reconstruction. So they basically used that as a master and reconstructed it a playable instrument. Yeah, how long have I been playing the recorder? At least there's evidence that I've been playing it for at least 40 years. That is Cushag, BC, before children. I included this because it gives you an idea of the sizes. This is a consort, but this is not all the sizes there are. This is the bass recorder, the same size that both Nikolai and I have, which is this big. It's our largest. They call it, actually, the official name for it is the basset. It's the small bass, the little bass. Over here on the right, you can see David Monroe of early music consort of London fame, and some of his people playing what we call an 8-foot consort with the great bass at C, or the sub-great bass, as they call it nowadays. And that is me at the early music shop in its old Bradford location. It's now gone to Saltaire, with that recorder. It's resting on the floor. And you can see I'm 5 foot tall. So it sort of gives you an idea of how big that recorder is. And I could just get my fingers around it. Now, that's an 8-foot consort. What you usually see collegium playing is what we call a 4-foot consort. So that would be soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, or basset.
Yeah.
We can also play a 2-foot consort. He just has to get the other 2 instruments.
Where'd it go? It's hiding. There it is. It's hiding. Yes. Your little ones.
So here we go. You want to move it? Let's move it over to the, so they can see all 4 of them. Yes. Alto in F, soprano in C, sopranino in C, and
Decline.
the Garkline, also known affectionately as the dog whistle.
Or at least that's what we call it.
Well, like I said, we affectionately call it the dog whistle. Actually, let's have the Klein for just a second. You can.
Not decline. Okay.
Sure. Or actually, it's your instrument. You should play it for now.
Okay.
Yeah. Give us the lowest note. That's the lowest note on that recorder. It goes up from there.
If you've got fat fingers, you can't play it.
Yeah. Sometimes we fight over who gets to play the Klein. So recorders, and that's sort of the archetypal family of instruments. But there are also others. Going on to the winds with reeds, bagpipe. Yes, bagpipe is a reed instrument, and yes, as you can see by the it's in manuscripts. It was playable. That one has 2 drones and a chanter. And the next one, I can hear Nikolai preparing it in the background, is the shawm. The shawm originated in the Middle East as a watchman's instrument, which makes you understand how loud it can be.
This particular one is a medieval shawm. It's got a small bell on it. So I'm just going to see if it's going to perform. Reeds are temperamental. Oh, wow.
Yeah. It gives you an idea of the sort of the nasal quality of the reeds. Some people, there has been reference to the reed instruments like the cornemuse and things blending well with voices, which has led some scholars to think that maybe in the Middle Ages or at the time when these instruments are being played, that some vocal music was more nasal than others. And you can, and when if you listen to recordings of different groups performing the same music, you can hear it done in multiple styles, either nasal singing or not nasal singing, or it varies depending on how that particular group is doing their scholarship and which they believe is more important. The shawm is a high instrument. It's an outdoor instrument, and we have a picture here of a shawm band or consort playing for dancers, and it's in an outside pavilion. I cut off a bunch of the thing just for room space. I wanted to show the shawms.
One thing about shawms, the Renaissance shawms have a very large bell on them. I was in the UBC recital hall, and they fired up a shawm band, and they just about blew us out of the back of the hall. It was so loud.
Yeah. And the shawms also go big, as there is our friend David Monroe playing a bass shawm. Now he unfortunately is no longer with us. He died in the late 70s, but he's only about 5'6".
Yeah, 5'6".
He's not a very big man, and so he had to tilt that in order to play it. So you can see that with the shawm, you're actually putting your mouth on the reed. Nikolai, if you could just, let's bring that forward so people can see. So you've got the pirouette here, and then you've got the reed on top.
If you have it against.
Let's see.
Let's see if we move.
Here we go. It's against the white of the doors. So there's the pirouette and there's the reed. And so your mouth is actually touching the reed, much like a modern oboe or bassoon. As a matter of fact, I think probably the closest thing we have nowadays is the oboe. If you go down and look at the Rausch fife below, and again, here he is with a consort of Rausch fifes. The Rausch fife looks a lot like the shawm, but it's got what we call a wind cap on it. So it's got a mouthpiece on that you then do enclose your embouchure and blow into it, and that then vibrates the reed. So it's sort of a cross between the shawm and the next page that we have, which are what we call the wind caps.
Okay, let's see if we get it over here. We might get better light.
So inside, this is one of our cornemuse, and inside is the double reed there, the same thing, but
Put it on. Line it up.
yeah, there's the wind cap, and I'll let you, as it's your instrument.
Okay.
We are not sharing instruments yet. I think we're going to be a year or so away from that. Gives you an idea. That's actually fairly quiet. I love it. We call these the buzzies, just because they are sort of a buzzy sound. They are incredibly difficult to play as a consort.
Really?
Well, individually, instrumentally, yes. The bigger ones are easier to play. The smaller ones, not so much fun. This kit-built consort of cornemuse we have here, that is exactly what Nikolai bought 30 some odd years ago when he built these.
Before marriage.
Yeah.
So it's over 35 years ago.
And this, I think you paid what, $300 for it?
Something
at
like
that point?
For the set.
For the set. We figured out it would probably be close to 10 grand if you wanted to get buy the same kit. This is not the finished instruments. This is the kit to build them. It's probably running up about there now.
Yeah.
So the cornemuse, again, is a wind cap. It's got a closed bottom, which is what keeps it on the quieter side of the instrument there. You can see there's no hole.
Actually, there is once you take the muffler off.
Yeah, but the muffler stays on usually. Next to the cornemuse and the crumhorns, of course, this is one of those classic instruments. Nikolai does have a consort of crumhorns as well. G alto, tenor bass. We haven't, their reeds aren't working right now. We have to get new reeds for them, but we can show them. These also were kit built. So the signature crook, you can see the wind cap. When it's got reeds in it, it has a reed there, and it is an open hole on the bottom. It is a much louder, slightly more obnoxious sound than the cornemuse. And we've used this to effect. There's one of the pieces we play as from Susato in the 1530s called Die Schlacht.
1550.
Or 1550, yeah. Die Schlacht. And we run 2 recorders on the top lines and 2 crumhorns on the bottom lines. And they basically make war with each other because that's what Schlacht is in German. It's great fun. I've included a thing here on the rackets. A racket is, you can see
little.
It's little, but it's not, because inside those cylinders, there are pipes that are bent and wound around up and down. So it actually is
6 times the length of that.
It actually is a very low instrument pitch-wise, with a and the fingering is not anywhere near the same as any of the other wind caps or recorders. It's very easy to move from one instrument to another. With the wind caps and the recorders, you have a totally new and different fingering system for the rackets.
It's bizarre.
It's quite bizarre.
Because of the folded tube inside the wood cylinder.
And they would be very expensive if you wanted to buy one.
You can get them from kits.
Yeah, you can do that. I'm not playing with that bent metal. And Praetorius from Syntagma Musicum, you can see this is his Roche fife. There's the crumhorns. That's the cornemuse and bagpipe. And he basically classified them all together as wind caps, because that's basically what it is. You blow into the bag blows into the reed. So,
your lips don't touch the reed.
Lips don't touch the reed. Moving on to brass. And the earliest brass, of course, wasn't brass at all. It was cowhorn. Any early McBeans would probably remember octohorn, which was essentially your blown in the end cow horn with a special modification. And there's an ivory horn there. You can see it's got a little mouthpiece too, but it's essentially just a curved little trumpet, such as were used much earlier in the biblical period in the Middle East. Trumpets, the straight trumpets, and Nikolai, you have one. This one dates from the old days of Canterbury Fair, the early Canterbury Fair, done at St. James Church. You can see how long that is. Whoa! That is standing about there in front of me.
Yeah.
We usually let our brass players handle those, people like Adana, just because they can get a much better and cleaner sound out of it than we can. They did also have a slide trumpet where you basically slid part of the trumpet out to change your pitch.
It had a really long mouthpiece is what it had.
Yeah. And then the folded trumpet. You still have the straight one there. Okay. And this one was a regular trumpet that had it's been devalved. It's been devalved. but it gives us an idea of what the original folded trumpet would look like. And that's the sort of thing that might have been used in a consort. The Look of Music display from 1980 in Vancouver had a bunch of things. Nikolai bought the slides when he went to that. So here we have a trumpet, a sackbut, a bunch of cornets, and you can notice over on the side, there's the edge of a serpent. And what is a serpent, you say? That is a serpent. We looked it up. It would only cost you about £4,000. This in terms of pricing. The cornet or cornetto or zinc. And this is a Dana's. See if I can get a decent sound out of it. I'm not as skilled a brass player as my daughters. No, not, but you can get an idea of the volume.
Sounds like a duck right now.
Okay, that's the player. This often took the place of a trumpet in the consort.
It'd be a top end instrument.
Yeah. And the sackbut, not that much difference between a modern trombone and a sackbut, except they had a much smaller bell.
And ornamentation.
I know we did used to have a couple of trombonists who have in the past played with us. We counted up, we probably had about 30 different people who have come in, played with us, and moved on to other things, moved away, started their own consorts, things like that. So our most recent sackbut player, my apprentice Dermot, is now a music teacher up in Cold Keep. Hunting horn. Again, this is a Dana's. Oh, it's getting a little bent here. Dana and Fiona can both get really good sound out of this. Well, you know. Yep. My upper participles just don't go that well. Yeah. And of course, we can't leave the brass section without the ever popular bum horn that are so prevalent in marginalia by scribes, sometimes with the actual horn sticking out of the butt, and sometimes just clouds of air. Yes, they had senses of humor. Moving on to plucked and hammered strings. The earliest one we have are the lyres, and this is Mr. Scala's instrument. And very good she is at it as well. They do have, this is the one, Nikolai took this picture in London.
Yes.
At the British Museum this is the Sutton Hoo lyre, and there's actually a manuscript depiction of it. And you can see it's pretty well the same. A standard medieval harp. We no longer have our harpist. Mistress Malin was our harpist. Brynja had done a little bit as well, but after an airline broke Malin's lap harp, Brynja gave hers to her aunt to make up for that loss. So we no longer have a harp. I'm toying with the idea of maybe getting one just to try it. If you see in manuscript the harp player wearing a crown, it's probably King David. Psaltery. Thank you. The psaltery has metal strings and single courses of wire are the thing. It's plucked with either fingers or quills. Nice little sound, lovely little instrument. Could be either played held, could be played, you can see much larger ones with dividers on them as well. The dividers would give you 2 ranges of notes then. It gives you a larger range, but this is the sort that you often see in pictures. This is a fairly modern version of it, but it still gives us that same sound. The hammerette. Here we go.
Yes.
That's what's
Yes,
happening.
hold it up in front of your face for a minute so they can see it.
So here we go. This is a version of a dulcimer. Lark in the Morning calls it a hammerette, which tells you it's meant to be struck. And it has double courses of metal strings. So each of these strings is actually 2. Which is sort of fun tuning it because you have to basically make sure that each pair is in tune. And this is one of those interesting little things with physics and music and mathematics, because they are related. The little bridge here in the center is on a ratio 3:2, which gives the pitches on each side are a fifth apart. If you go 3:5, then it's a fourth. And it's based on the Fibonacci number series, and the overtone series that brass players use also works on that same number sequence. Isn't math wonderful? So I have to change, in order to get that top note, I have to change the over in order to do that. Or you can play the same thing. There it is in fifths. And I'm just going to have you remember the shape of these little things that beat the hammers. Dana pointed out to me when she was here today that they look like your clavicle, your collarbone. More on that later. And more plucked strings. The sitole and the gittern. A lot of time, these instruments seem to be, the names seem to be used interchangeably. McGee tells us that gitterns were generally 4 or 3 to 5 strings, gut stringed, and sitoles were at least 4 metal stringed. Well, I don't know, but this one here doesn't look like a gittern. It looks like a sitole, and that does look like gut strings. So I'm thinking that in terms of modern scholarship, it sort of depends. I would go sitole, metal strings, gittern, gut string. But this little piece of instrument from the sitole project at, I believe it was Harvard, these are the shapes of sitoles in manuscripts. And as you can see, they look quite different. Now, these are from the Cantigas de Santa Maria manuscript, and they could be sitoles. These could be sitoles. They could be dejuelas. We don't know. They could be either,
It's a stringed instrument.
It's a stringed instrument. And basically, you can see that nice little pear shape there. That one probably is a gittern. It's actually only got 3 strings. The seterone has it's actually double coursed strings. So it's double strung like a 12-string guitar, as opposed to a 6-string guitar. The cithara, again, has extra strings on it, slightly different. And this is the vihuela, which is the forerunner of the modern guitar.
Spanish.
It's Spanish, very Spanish, but the guitar is also Spanish. They did have things that they called guitars back then, but they weren't like modern. It wasn't like my modern guitar. And of course, everybody knows the lutes with their funky little back-turned pegboard. But the long-necked lute doesn't have that back-turned thing. But lutes were sort of the instrument from the Renaissance. They moved from an accompaniment role or a melody role to an accompaniment role. Lute songs are one of the archetypal Renaissance solo forms, either with the player also singing or the player accompanying a singer. We have had a couple of lutenists come through Collegium. David Peryanov was an early one.
1986.
Yeah, back around that period. He then went away to do his master's and then his doctorate at universities back east, and is working with early music, I believe, now in either Montreal or Toronto. I'm not sure where he is now. And more recently, about 10 years ago, we had a young man come through and joined us for a little bit, but he couldn't balance school, work, and playing for his parents' Bulgarian dance groups and Collegium. But anybody who can come in and sight read a score part of 4 recorders into a lute part, he was pretty special. 10 years ago, we ran into him again. He invited us to his grad recital. We did put him in touch with Ray Nurse from the Vancouver Early Music Society,
who is the foremost lute maker in North America,
and happens to be in our area.
Lives in North Van.
We met him at a concert and said, "Hey Ray, if you get a young man named Constantine coming through at UBC, yeah, you want him." He was 10 years ago. He was UBC's first graduate in a Bachelor of Music in lute. He then went back to McGill, got his master's, and apparently came back. Dana had me look him up. Came back and did his doctorate at UVic. So he's now a doctor of music, and you can find him on YouTube as Uncle Costa. So yeah, we're very proud of him. The mandora is another interesting sort of lute type, somewhere between lute and guitar. Again, double courses. The cittern arose out of the sitole, but you can see here it's got extra strings on the sides, on both sides. So it's got extra higher strings, it's got extra low strings, sort of add-ons. And the theorbo is again related to the lute. Nikolai likes to call it the lute on steroids. As you can see too, there's extra courses going up to here and also on this side. And then we get into our bowed strings. The Welsh had a lyre that they bowed, and essentially what they do is they put their hands through the holes, and there's a keyboard there, and you basically stop your strings on the frets on the keyboard there, and bowed the strings over the losing words here. This little bit, the bridge. Thank you. And there is from manuscript. Yeah. I believe this also was meant to be King David. Rebek. This is my newest toy. I am not playing it very well yet, but three gut strings and a single piece body. So the body is all in one piece. The facing part here is one piece. There are no frets on this one. There could be frets. And it is a bow of this shape.
A low tension bow.
So the tensioning is done with your thumbs. I've only had this a couple of months. The first month was spent getting it to hold its tune and getting it acclimatized. So there it is. Cushag just learning how to starting her instrument there. Hopefully you'll see it improve over the next few months. But the best part of it is that it can give, because the bridge is not very rounded like a modern violin. So modern violins, by tilting the bow, you can go from string to string. With this one, you can actually do, as they say, double stop. You can use it for drones, with 2 drones at a time. I am looking forward to that, and I know that others in Collegium have also indicated interest. I am looking forward to the time when when we can get together again, and I can actually talk to people with string experience like Mistress Ciaradwin or Edgeforth, just to maybe speed my development. Yes, never too late to start learning new things. The VL is the medieval fiddle. Mistress Malin has one of these as well that Master Sir Scalanus built for her. He was about 10 or 15 years ago doing a lot of building, either from kit or from scratch.
Strings.
And he built her VL, her medieval fiddle, which is placed, she plays at the waist. You can see it can be played upright like this. It could be played horizontally, either at the chin or at the waist. And again, it's that same low tension bow. The reverse bows with the frogs, those are modern. That's a very 1700s type thing. He also built her a hurdy-gurdy, and that was fun. Keeping in tune was always fun, but
so many strings.
And you can see, you see pictures of it. The giveaway in manuscript is it's got a crank on the end, and that's what happened. It's also called the viella roue, or the wheeled vielle. And when you look at one with its uncovered, you can see that there actually is a rosined wheel down here. The crank spins it, and the wheel will resonate the strings. And then the keys up here stop the strings at the various places on the thing. Usually there's one or two drone strings and a melody string, is how that works. The organistrum down here, if any of you have ever seen the group Winter Harp, and if you haven't, I highly recommend them. They do medieval-esque type things, harp, percussion, nickel harpa, and some very nice things. some slightly modern pieces, some old pieces in modern style, but sure gets you in the right sort of mood for Christmas. But they do have an organ instrument, and yes, it does take 2 people to play. That puppy is the width of this room, and you basically have one person at the end cranking the wheel and the other person changing any stops at the other end. The Nyckelharpa is one of those interesting instruments. It is much like a hurdy-gurdy, except it's bowed. And as you can see, all the keys down the side here, those are where the stopping for the frets. It's not, yes, it's sort of notes, but it's not notes like a keyboard. It is first fret, second fret, third fret, stopping where the notes are. And then the second rank will be for another string, and the third rank will be for another string. And so which button you press tells you which fret you are stopping at which point. As you can see, say how this girl is playing it. So the longest keys are up at the top here. The shortest ones are near the back, because of course that's the way your hands would work. And she is bowing all the strings. And one last stringed instrument. The Nyckelharpa was very much in use in the Middle Ages. It sort of disappeared and was used mostly in Sweden. And now it's coming back into favor, modern era, and is now pretty well pan-Europe for early music types. Tromba marina. This is an interesting instrument. It actually only has one string on the outside that you bow, and you can stop, get different notes, but it's got resonating strings on the inside. So it gives this sort of rattling, buzzing, sometimes resonating, sometimes just rattling, interesting sound. It's one of those instruments that was around for not very long, but made a big impression when it was around.
It was sometimes called the nun's trumpet, and the actual shape of the instrument is triangular, flat top, and then 2 sides joining in the middle of the back. So it's a bit bizarre, unusual.
Yeah. And as you can see, but it was around for long enough. That's 14th century garb. And it hung around till about the late 1500s, just a couple hundred years. Keyboards, almost done. Whoop, went too far. The portative organ. Portative meaning portable, carryable, from porte to carry. And it was there's a little keyboard, there's a little rank of pipes there, and you used a bellows on the back. So you can see we have 2 different kinds of bellows, either vertical or horizontal. And the bellows were worked by the player, and the keyboard was played with the other hand. Now, as you can see, this is a modern version because it's got both the black and the white keys. The earliest ones would not have had the black keys. They would have just had a straight set of keys, and whichever key it was in, it was in. Because they didn't use our modern major and minor keys, they used the modes, and the modes were based on which step of a regular natural C scale did you start on. I've actually tuned my psaltery goes from G to G, and so normally to get a modern standard major scale, I would have had to tune the Fs to F sharp. I left them natural to make it a G. If I left them that way, it would be modal, and I then made a B flat to make it a G Dorian scale, and that's because a lot of our music is played in G Dorian. So I've actually tuned it to the music that I play. The positive organ, so not positive as in positive and negative, but positive as in one places it on a tabletop, one positions it. And this was a fairly common organ in churches. And as you can see here, you've got some poor sod we're pumping the bellows, and there's the person playing it. Bellows of varying kinds. This one has it right at the back, one lady playing, one lady pumping. This one actually is a good view because it shows you the front of the organ, and there's the bellows in the back. Positives can get bigger nowadays. Still see positive organs. I know one of my instructors accompanied me on the positive organ because he had one visiting, and it was about a 4-foot cube, and it had an electric pump inside, so he didn't have people having to pump it. But it's a small organ. He has a lovely big organ at his home church of West Van United, gorgeous big organ there. But he really liked the idea of doing the early music with the positive because it was a much better sound to match the music. We also had a lovely little instrument called the regale. And as you can see, there's the keyboard, there's the pumps, but there's no pipe. So basically what the bellows were doing was they were pushing air through the pipes. This one doesn't have pipes, but what it has got is metal reeds that vibrate. So in a lot of ways, the regale is much like the forerunner of the modern accordion. So, and all the other concertinas, harmoniums, squeeze boxes.
Yeah. And it would have been used for choir practices because it's little and it's got reeds, and the human ear picks up on reeds for tuning better than it does for other tones.
Yeah. The regale in England and France, I was doing a little bit of research on this one. In England and France, the regale became the name of an organ stop.
Yes.
It's now known as the vox humana, the human voice stop. So if you wonder what the heck the regale was, that's the reed that's the one that supposedly imitates the human voice. And into our last slide, the plucked and hammered strings. So we have the virginal, which has a keyboard, and it is plucked string. So it's like a harpsichord where the string is plucked by a little hook. When you depress the key, the hook plucks the string. The clavichord hammers the strings, and this is the thing that Adina pointed out this afternoon, that the clavichord, the little hammers, are like the ones that we have for the hammerette that look like clavicles. Clavicle, clavichord. Makes sense. Harpsichords are also a plucked string, and you can see the keyboard on those ones is on the end, so that all the mechanics are at one end. And again, Malin has a harpsichord that sits in her living room, and she gets to play every once in a while. We did plan on playing something with Collegium that actually used the harpsichord, but again, this comes into the difficulty in getting music and musicians and everybody together and on the same page and practiced in order to do this. Organs are a different thing. I did take organ as a minor instrument when I was a music student. And organs actually, if anything else, are medieval synthesizers. So it's an on-off mechanism. So when you depress the key, it opens the pipe, the sound comes through. Unlike the harpsichord or the hammering of the clavichord, where the action of the key strikes the string or plucks the string, and that's how the sound is created. The organ will play your note until you lift your finger. So actually doing your scales and things on an organ is sort of interesting, because on regular keyboards, you're da 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 da. Your fingers sit on top of the keys, and you press down, and release it and bring it back up. With organ, you have to keep it down, and then as you go to the next one, you have to turn it on and off. So there's an interesting hand movement for playing organ that's different. And if you ever want to talk about interesting organs, there is an old Roman one. Nikolai has information on it called the hydraulis. And it was
in Colosseums. It was so loud. You could be heard a mile away.
But it had 4 guys pumping hydraulic, cylinders.
Bellows into a tub of water, basically.
To force the air through the instruments. Very different mechanism than the bellows that we see here on these instruments. And if you wondered where the organs went, here is the current modern organ at King's College, Cambridge. That's the pipe array. And that is the manuals. And you can see all the stops for all the pipes. So each array of pipes has a stop. And essentially what you're doing with that is you're layering sound. So when you pull a set of stops, it opens up a set of pipes, and then you can hear them when you play them, and you can combine them. So say you've got your flute, your diapason, and you've got your vox humana all playing on this manual, it will play all 3 ranks of pipes with one manual. Or you can have them on different manuals, and you can have one hand on each manual. Yes, that is 4 manuals you see there, and pedals underneath.
And you've probably got one person on each side manning the stops for you.
Just because that's a lot of stops,
And they're all pull stops.
As opposed to toggles, as you see in a lot of modern organs. So that was one of the things that the Middle Ages was way ahead of their time, was the organs and the stops on the organs. And there were major organs in churches by 1400s.
Yeah.
Just not quite as humongous as the modern ones. Okay. So I have some audio clips. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Right now I'm going to share a different screen. Come on, where am I going? There we are. I keep losing my thing, and I am going to pull. Actually, what I need to do is just pull this up in front. There we go. Sorry, my screens are set up in the way that I have to go backwards to the normal way I would move it from screen to screen. I have to go the other way. Different share. This is, let's see the instruments in action. This is a group called Hesperian 21, and the singers are the Capella Real de Catalunya. And as you can see, you've got all your low instruments in the front, you've got your high instruments in the back, and you've got the singers in between. This is a piece called Stella Splendens. Start her off with the harp. Singers rearranging themselves from their places in the last piece. The clip I've given in the handout is the entire concert this is from. This is the second piece in the concert. We're just going to listen to the one. You notice he's got his hand on the top of the harp. He's got some accidentals there. So he's got special keys that will raise and lower the tone of the string. So that's what he's doing, is he is modifying the pitch of certain strings. Viel. You see the plucked psaltery there, to and from him. Lutes on either side of the harp.
It's a reed pipe.
The young man has a reed pipe, so regular pipe but uses a reed. There's your hammered dulcimer. Back row, hurdy-gurdy, cornetto, shawm, sackbut, and of course the bells. Pairing the soft instruments with the voices. Pairing the voices with the high instruments. And everybody plays for the chorus. We'll just go until we see the instruments on the other end. So you saw they had the psaltery sort of two over from the viol. On the other side, they have the hammered dulcimer. You see how that one's being plucked?
And it's being sung in Latin with a French translation.
Well, it was the French broadcast company that was doing it. Good view of cranking that hurdy-gurdy. Actually, we'll stop it there. Beside the hammer dulcimer, there was a rebec and then a recorder. So they basically had a lot of those instruments covered. Moving on to the next clip, this is the Saltarello by a group called Artefactum. This is a Spanish group. Actually, the previous group was also a Spanish group, but they were doing a concert in Barcelona for a French company. Yes, that was a portative organ he was unpacking. And there's his hurdy-gurdy. This gentleman plays their wind caps. This second gentleman herein, he plays their regular flute type recorders. Notice the lutenist is using a plectrum. He's not plucking with his fingers, he's using a plectrum or quill. And that was perfectly legit too for most stringed instruments. You can see there's a, looks like a, I'm not sure what that is. I thought it was a psaltery at first, but it almost looked like there was a keyboard on the end of it. No, no, it's a psaltery. That is just an unusually
Unusually good.
and also triangular rather than
Yeah.
rhomboidal. There's a good view of the pipes or the bellows being used. There's the hurdy-gurdy. You can see the wheel turning. Notice the lute has double courses. Okay. Let's leave that one for now. I'm going to finish off with a favorite clip of mine. This is a group from the Ukraine called Kings and Beggars. I actually think that they might be SCA friendly or SCA affiliated because I've seen some of their videos that they look like it's at an SCA type event. They're at least involved with recreation. This is a lovely anachronistic piece based on a Polish students' tune called Breve Regnum, and they've done it up like a period, music video with illuminations instead of animations. So this is Breve Regnum. Enjoy. The costuming is pretty good too. Shawm to start with. And a smaller one.
That's sitting at maximum volume. YouTube sitting at maximum volume.
Yep, sorry. Young man going off to college. And this is what university would have looked like back in period. Notice that those Crumhorn and Shawm together have a rather obnoxious effect. It's lovely. Wakes people up. And of course, having drunk a lot in the pub the night before, they're all sleeping through class. Ah, young love. You see the difference, even having the same music played with recorders and the and the high instruments makes a big difference in how the feel of it comes across. Roommate's not impressed. And now he's writing poetry in class instead of taking notes. Uh-oh, competition. I know, I think that's another suitor. Yeah, they got a little beat up. But I think he still won the girl. Doesn't that remind you of Harold Hadrada?
Yeah. Kate's Park.
Right, in the fall,
Yeah.
He's starting to fall on the ground. That's got to be one of my favorite things of all the things I discovered during the COVID year. Just a pleasure. That group, they did a whole show of cantigas too, so their scholarship is fairly solid. So back to share screen again. There we go. Back to the slideshow. So those links do work, and there's some other groups to look at, things that Nikolai and I have both been looking at, and some other places down at the bottom that you can search. Tallis Consort, King's Singers, Ensemble Unicorn, those are all groups with good scholarship that is perfectly, anything that they're doing is probably going to be worth listening to. The thing with YouTube is that because of the way they do linkage, you go into a mix and all of a sudden you're going and listening to something else and you went, where the heck did that come from? Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes you're sort of going, no, back. So rabbit holes. And the last little bit before we end, issues in using instruments in a consort, in a group. Just apart from learning how to play the instruments themselves, sometimes you've got the range of voices in your group and the instruments, or the ranges of the instruments don't match your music. And sometimes you have to fiddle with the parts, rejig them, transpose.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If your music has sections, you can play with using different, in this section where the music's higher, we'll use these instruments. When it's lower, we'll use these instruments. So you can play around with things that way and, basically jig them. The timbre of the instruments, the timbre is the quality of sound. So think of the sound of the crumhorns and the cornemuse as opposed to the sound of the organetto, the sound of the Gem's horn or the recorder or a lute. So
some things don't blend very well.
No. And sometimes in period, this was intentional practice. They liked it that way. So judicious use of some instruments with only certain pieces of music or only in certain ways. So at the beginning, I will very likely be doing a lot of droning with my rebec until my finger skills get up to speed. That's how we'll rejig around me. Often we'll give drones to beginning players, or a drone on one note on a crumhorn is a lot easier to play than the whole thing. So that's how you can sort of do things. And speaking of things like crumhorns, they are challenging instruments. The wing caps and the reeds, for me, learning a bowed instrument is going to be a bit of a challenge. It has been for the last month or so. So you have to get things in tune before you perform. You want to make sure that it's in tune. And getting everybody in tune just to start playing the first note with a crumhorn consort can take 10 minutes because air pressure changes the pitch. So finding that point where we're all in tune and our reeds are pushed in and pulled out, and everybody, so that basically we found our baseline. Now we can play, but you have to tighten the muscles around your mouth so much that
They tire.
you tire. And after 10 minutes, your lips are shot. So,
You can't play the instrument that long when you're starting.
No, you can't. And that's why I have a lot of admiration for chaps like that guy from Artefactum who is playing that for the whole thing. That's his instrument. He's obviously very practiced on that. The guy who's playing the recorders probably couldn't do that for that long because his chops would give out. So that's why you see if Collegium's doing something with the crumhorns, we're doing one piece, and we're probably not doing repeats. Just and other things in between to rest our embouchures and get our lips back. And of course, the ubiquitous different skill levels of players, or different skill levels with the same player on different instruments. So working around learning new instruments, bringing in new people who are learning repertoire as well, arranging the music so that the more experienced players have more difficult music to play. That keeps them challenged so they don't get bored, but it doesn't give simpler parts to your newer people, your beginners, and that way it's enough of a challenge to keep them coming, but you're not going to blow them out of the water and make them frustrated and not make them want to quit. So it's finding that balance point is a very it's sometimes a difficult thing to do. And sometimes you get people who will say, I want to learn new instruments, I want to play other parts. And then they say, oh, but I really want to know my part well before we perform it. And we're going, okay, so which one do you want? We can do one, we can do the other. And we find that what we call doubling parts, so giving the same part to two people or more, so one experienced person and one less experienced person, and have them both play it, doesn't put as much pressure on the new person while they're learning it, because they've got somebody there who will play all the right notes, and they can basically build on each other. We often do this with singing parts too. Some of our people joke about being codependent altos. They're just fine if they're all there, and they can depend on each other. Actually, they can all do it on their own quite nicely. Thank you very much. But they feel a lot better about it when they're all there and they have each other to lean on. So again, that's another way you can work around new players to instruments, new people to the group, basically skill levels of players being different. And like I said, you can see me, I've been playing recorder a long time. I've been playing the Rebec, since it stabilized with its tuning, I've been playing maybe a month. So let's see how I do next year and see what sort of change you can all see. So at this point, I will stop sharing because it's opening up for question time. Stop share, come on.
One stop share.
There we go.
Unmute everybody so you can all babble at us.
Oh, look at that.
Can we unmute all? I said
Yes.
mute all.
I think a lot of us were just listening.
Okay. Well, the listening part is over. I'm just looking in the chat here.
Actually, I do have a question for you too.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a quill was used for plucking sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
What type of quill would they be using?
Bird feather.
Well, which bird? I'm kind of thinking.
Whatever you could pick up off the ground. Often you would save your wing feathers from the Christmas goose.
Okay.
Quill.
It's the Cligger for me and scribal side coming through going,
Yes,
which quills do you want?
The same sort of quills you would use for pens.
Got it.
So yes, we're fighting.
Anyone that works.
Nikolai found that crows and seagulls work fairly well. That's what we have in our area, and you can pick up off the ground fairly easily.
Good to know.
Feathers are also nice for cleaning out the insides of the fiddles, the
Windways on recorders. I've got a bunch of feathers sitting with my recorder set.
Okay, I'm just going through the chat here. Elephant tusk, yes. A lot of, like I said, we're sort of trying to limit it. Can you imagine if we tried to do worldwide instruments? Just not there. And yeah, music is expensive. It is. Organ would take a while to learn. Yeah.
It's sort of like driving a standard car and then some. With a manual transmission, you got to do the clutch, the gas pedal, the brake, and then also control the stops. It's an art to pick the right stops for your music.
Yeah.
Some people can do it and some people can't.
I remember I played for one church service. Our organist was away, and I said, I'm not very good. I am really not very good. And they said, well, we want you to do it anyhow. But you're sitting there on the organ. The organ bench is fairly high because it has to go over the pedals.
Mm-hmm.
And you usually see organists perched
on the edge.
They don't sit on their butt. They perch on the edge of the organ bench, with their feet propped up, because they can't actually sit, but they need to be able to have their feet touch the pedals, and you're actually playing the pedals with your feet. And you have to have shoes with a good hard heel so that you can rock your feet back and forth up the pedals, and you're doing 2 or 3 manuals at the same time. And often you'll preset, so you go, I want those stops on that manual and those stops on that manual, and then I can vary a verse by changing manuals. And it's like I said, with the mechanism of keying the things, having to, it's not just touch the keys, it's turn it off, turn it on. It's like a computer, on, off, it's a binary system.
Yeah. If you want to see a good young organist working your organs in the Netherlands, his name is Gert van Hoof, and he is the same age as my daughter Kate, but he is a phenomenal organist.
And he's what, that would be about 25?
About that, yeah.
Yeah.
He was born in 94. And he is just out of this world. His musicianship is absolutely phenomenal. And he's got, well, usually his wife now pulling the stops for him.
Yeah. Anybody who's wanting to get into music, we are always willing to talk to anybody about instruments. Nikolai actually did at one point run a beginning recorder group. We ran it on sort of alternating weeks with Collegium. And that's how we actually brought up a number of players who then, once they've got learned their instrument, felt confident, we moved them up into Collegium. And that's how we got Ellan Vannin. You may have noticed one of the pictures on the Human Voice page was the ladies of Collegium singing at a demo. Oh, Netta.
We have a putty cat now.
Yeah. She wants cuddles. The ladies of Collegium, I know what we were singing too. Because Bryony, who wasn't part of Collegium at that point, and Fiona joined us, we were singing Ale Solite, which is a 3-part piece, and they had done it at school. So they came in and joined us for that particular thing, which is, it's fun to, when people know something, sure, come on, sing it with us. Doesn't work for madrigals, and people who are used to an improvisatory style of music. I've had that with people coming in and wanting to do madrigals and just make up lines. Madrigals don't work that way.
They are crafted.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how, so many fun things. Yeah, and if people are interested in coming out to Collegium and trying us out,
Or even just to listen.
yeah. Oh. And that is what it is too, is that, as we usually have people trying us out as much as us trying them out. I know with, Constantine was an immediate fit. It was sort of funny because him being a lutenist is actually due to me. He was a guitar major at Douglas College when I first started there, and the new head of the language, literature, performing arts, the new dean, used to be my theory and history teacher at Vancouver Community College when I was a music student. So he knew that I did early music. He knew about Collegium, which at that point was like 14 years old, 24 years old. So when Constantine went and talked to him about and said, I really would like to get into lute, he said, you need to go down and talk to Aaron in the geography lab.
He went, what?
And he sort of
Geography?
went, what? And he was taking a geography course at the time. He goes, Aaron in the, like the technician? Yeah. He said she runs an early music consort. So I was able at that point, due to just the way things work, we weren't inviting him to Collegium at that point because he was a student. He was a student in a class that I was helping with. So that was, but he wanted to know about lutes. And I said, here's who you want to contact. And if you can find a copy of the Early Music Journal from the Vancouver Early Music Society, they often have used instruments for sale. So about a month later, he walked into the lab with a lute. And the next semester after he finished his geography class, that's when he came and tried out Collegium, when he was no longer a student in a class that I was working with. But like I said, he was a brilliant musician. He picked up lute really quickly from guitar, and they're not quite the same, even if you're a classical guitarist. But like I said, his name is Konstantin Bozhanov, and you can find him. He's, I think, somewhere out in Salt Spring or some place like that, doing music, or maybe in the over by Mill Bay and the Cowichan Valley. I think he does things in that area. So he does lute. He does arc lute, which is even bigger than theorbo. He was also a very accomplished accordionist and guitarist. So he does just about everything, and he sings.
Second comment from the bottom, from Kenrick.
Kidding. When will we be playing at Fight Practice again? Well, considering that last week was the first mention that we could come out to Fight Practice, we will have to try and see what we can do. It would be nice to play again, and outdoors. It does look like outdoors might be the place that we could start. So what do you think, Nikolai?
Yeah, I'm game. The front porch is big enough.
Yeah, your front porch is big enough now. Like to try
Thank you, Kendrick.
like to try that front porch. We could try next week or the week after.
Something like that. We'll have to talk to everybody else and just see,
we'll see
who's available.
Who's available.
Even if it's just the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah, audience is important. Yeah, we built you a porch. Yeah, I bet it has light too. Yeah. And audience is important. And I have to say, Elvina has always been a wonderful audience for Collegium. And we really...
So is Colin too.
And actually, Alistair and...
Yes.
Alistair
Colin understands French when we sing it. When we do the naughty French songs, he laughs.
And 2 or 3 weeks and a Dana can show up again. Yes. We've missed doing music at all the last
Year and a
16
half.
months. Yeah. But fortunately that's coincided with the Dana's schooling, so we haven't had to do things without her quite so much.
Not that quite big a hit, but still it's a hit.
Yeah.
We can at least get going with instrumental stuff again.
Well, singing's sort of good too.
Yeah.
Anybody can sing.
Yeah.
And that was the thing with in the Middle Ages, is that even if you were not a good singer, everybody sang.
You don't want to hear me sing.
Well, this is where you would double apart, right? We'd put you together with somebody else who was louder, and you'd sing along, and it'd all be good.
I usually only sing at Bardic fires where everybody else is louder than me and drunk and don't care.
It works. I mean, let's face it, I improvised the McBean chant, having got the Latin translation from another former collegium person who was also an organist and a linguistics major for his master's. But he gave me the lyrics, and I improvised that when I'd had quite a lot of sake.
Uh-huh.
How many years did you and Ellan try to teach me? Well, the thing is, you're a special case because you're missing certain tones in your hearing due to your kayaking accidents. So you were good until you hit one of those notes. But you sang along and you enjoyed it, and that was the big thing. Yeah, we do find that you get used to having certain people in the group with certain skills and certain instruments, and then they move on to do something else, and you're sort of going, damn. Now we have to scroll back and restart. So we're always rejigging. We're always looking at new stuff.
Resetting old stuff.
We have in the past, we started in March of 1983.
Something like that, yeah.
It took us, that was the four of us, Nikolai and myself, Mistress Caradwin and Mistress Malin. And it took the four of us until Baronial Banquet to learn 4 pieces. And we worked hard.
Yeah.
All year for that. We could probably do this, the same 4 people could probably do the same thing in about 3 weeks now.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
Or less.
That was the period Nikolai started collecting instruments at that point. Getting all his recorders. I've now got my set of recorders. And that's actually that was one of the other things. If you're looking for trying out a recorder and seeing how it works, everybody talks about the ubiquitous, horrible plastic recorders. Some are better than others. Okay. This is a Carlton one I picked up at Long and McQuaid. They probably have them at other music stores as well. I think I picked it up for $5 or $10, and it actually not too bad of a tone. I mean, it's not quite as nice. Not as nice as the wooden ones, but this, I don't feel bad about taking this out to a camping event when it's raining. The one thing about the plastic recorders, though, is that with wooden ones, the condensation will be absorbed by the wood. In this, it gathers. So you're sucking up your spit an awful lot. Also, another thing, this is what they call a Baroque recorder. And this one is a Renaissance. So you can...
Yeah, if you tilt it that way.
There we go. Now
we
you can see the hole. Notice the hole. This is a conical bore, and this was a conical bore flaring out, and this one's a conical bore sort of going the other way.
keeps going down.
This is meant to be a solo instrument. This one's meant to be played in a consort. And that's sort of the difference between Renaissance and Baroque recorders.
There's other things that happen too, because with the Baroque ones, the music was speeding up. So with the Baroque instruments, because it does straight down, there's less air in the instruments. So it's a faster instrument. The Renaissance ones do this at the bottom. If you look carefully, they flare. So they are a louder instrument, but they're very slightly slower.
Yeah. And the bigger the instrument, the slower it speaks as well. So Nikolai, I can play the bass. I can play all of the recorders. But yeah, the speaking on the big bass recorders, you're going and putting a lot of air in.
And sometimes we're limited by the speed of the instrument.
Yeah. One other thing that you have to watch is with wooden recorders is how you store them.
Yes.
Nikolai has an example on the table of what happens when your recorder is stored in the sun.
I don't know if you can actually see that. It becomes a little bubbly. The wax in the instrument comes.
Oh, you can just sort of see. So here it's smooth on that side, and then as I turn it, can you see the bubbly texture on the back side here? These are sealed not with varnish, but with beeswax, and it's basically worked into the wood.
Oh, yeah, it's really bad on the mouth up there.
Oh, look at the mouthpiece. Yuck. Oh, I wouldn't want to put my mouth on that. I mean, basically what he has to do in order to bring that back to life is to heat it slightly and start rubbing the wax back into the wood. Yeah. Does it impact the sound? I don't know, actually. It probably would.
You don't want to play it, basically.
Yeah, you'd want to fix it first.
Yeah.
Instruments that aren't played also dry out, and you have to bring them back up. Both Nikolai and I have to do some,
work the recorders.
Back up. And again, post-COVID, we'll probably be doing a lot more of the everybody brings their own instruments, and we'll be running non-matched consorts until everybody's inoculated and we feel safe again. Wood instruments are again, because wood is a more
slightly disinfectant type.
Yeah, slightly disinfectant type thing. We've never felt too badly about sharing instruments, although we did avoid doing it if anybody had a cold. That person played their own instruments. But other than that, we don't feel too bad about sharing. Okay. So I see people are starting to drop out, and I know we're getting on. Anything else? Any other things that like I said, feel free to come talk to us about.
Email us. We can send you links for stuff.
And like I said, Uruguay, I'm going to send you our PowerPoint.
Perfect. And I'll attach that to the event.
Okay, let me just turn it off first. Excuse me, I just have to shut this down for a second. And
Where's your PowerPoint?
there's my PowerPoint. And stop slideshow.
Close slideshow. You have to close it first.
I have to close the file first before I can send it.
Yeah. Otherwise the computer gets upset.
Yep. And I just opening up my email. I'll email it to you like I did before, Uruguay.
That's perfect.
Thank you Beth, so much for sharing so much information. My brain's exploding. It was so.
We're not surprised. We could talk this for like 8 hours.
back in the old days of ITHRA, I did do an overview of a medieval and Renaissance music. That was essentially a guided listening tour to 1,000 years of music
Wow.
in 4 hours.
And
Wow.
I've done a survey of instruments class in 4 hours. The first 2 hours was a slide and tape show. The cassette tape doesn't work anymore. And then the last 2 hours was let's go play with the instruments. So I laid my hands on as many different instruments as I could in the barony and borrowed a lot.
That
They were
must-
both fabulous classes.
Sounds like the
I
best
am
kind of
more than
class.
willing to do the overview. What I would probably want to do is do it on a longer time frame, and sort of maybe end with a potluck sort of thing.
Yeah.
If once we can
Do that again.
start doing things like that again. Okay, use that address and subject.
Perfect. Well,
Presentation.
why don't I take this opportunity to just stop the recording. Thank you again so much. That was really cool to be able to see the evolution of instruments, the changes over time, how they're used, how they're layered.
Yeah.
It was so much information to be able to sit and kind of process it and have a guided tour through it all. It was really, really neat. So thank you so much, Mistress Cushag, Master Nikolai. That was a lot
It
of
was
fun.
our pleasure. And just insert. Come on, insert.
There we go.
No, it's not inserting yet.
No, it's not inserting yet.
Okay.
It'll get there. All right, I'm going to stop the recording right now.
Thank you.
Thanks again.